All right, here we go, rocking and rolling on another episode of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Pleased to be joined by Frank Bures today. Frank, we already kind of got the pleasantries out of the way as we were chatting before we hit record. But what's going on, man? How you doing? Nice to chat with you and connect.
Good, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to chatting. You sent me a little rundown about some of your background and the new book you got coming out, which is called "Pushing the River: An Epic Battle, a Lost History, a Near Death, and Other True Canoeing Stories." And talk about fitting like a glove for this podcast. It's nearly perfect.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So you're in Minneapolis, is that right?
Yes. Yep,
Cool.
I'm in Minneapolis. And just up the river from you. You're down in northern Illinois?
Yep, you got it. About an
Okay.
hour and a half east, I should say, of the Mississippi, near
Okay.
Savannah. Well, not near Savannah, but about an hour and a half east of Savannah.
Oh yeah. We had a stop in Savannah when I was on the 2021 Guinness World Record crew. That's where our first support boat failed for the last time.
Oh, geez. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into all of that and getting into your book and chatting paddling in rivers. But I guess first, tell me a little bit about your background with canoeing and paddling and how you kind of got into it.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Winona, Minnesota, also on the river, and my family's not a huge outdoors fan, but I was in Boy Scouts and stuff like that, and so we did some canoeing. We actually had when I was in Boy Scouts, we had Mike Chickanowski who started Winona Canoe and still runs Winona Canoe. He was kind of worked with our troop to help us learn how to paddle and everything, and then I just paddled on Lake Winona uh, in high school, a fair amount. And then after in college, I worked at a camp in northern Minnesota called Camp YMCA Camp Olson, and I was the trips director for a year there. So sending people up to the Boundary Waters, and then since we moved back to Minneapolis, I've just been we have an old Grumman that washed up on my grandma's shore on the Minnehaha Creek in the '60s, and I still use it. It's still like such an awesome canoe. Um,
Amazing.
and I have a little solo canoe that I take out on the Mississippi, and I have a bike trailer, so I take it over to we have a lake in a town here called Lake Nokomis, so I just bike it over there and paddle around sometimes. But it's not very far from our house to Pool One on the Mississippi, um, and so it's a nice area to paddle in.
Beautiful, man. I love it. Yeah, it's an amazing river, and Minnesota is an amazing canoe culture and canoe heritage too. Growing up in Illinois, there's a lot of canoeing and paddling around, but I didn't really know about it all that much, mostly Wisconsin, right? And I moved out west after high school for college and spent like a little less than 10 years kind of bouncing around out west. And
Hmm.
it's like the canoeing culture is just not there. It's rafting, right? It's all rafting out there, whitewater stuff, because there's just not the
Right, right.
same flat water and water. Uh, just lends itself those rapids and creeks more to rafting. But coming back, I've been back in Illinois here. Oh, let's see, I guess about 6 years or so. And I just kind of like realized, like hit home, like how big canoeing culture is here. It's like Wisconsin, Minnesota, uh, and Maine really are like the main big canoeing hubs. So yeah, it's cool to
Hmm.
be from the canoe culture right in Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm actually giving a talk later this summer at the Wisconsin Canoe Museum in Spooner, which is supposed to be really good. And we have a canoe museum in Ely too. That's kind of looking for a home. I think it's in the Ely Folk School right now, but it's so we might have our own canoe museum here. And um, there's a big canoe museum up in Peterborough that opened in Canada last year. So um, that's it's big up there too. Canada is huge for canoeing.
100%. Yeah, dwarfs us. That's like hockey and canoeing, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, I was lucky to get a forward to my book from Alex Hutchinson, he usually writes about running, but he's also a big canoeer, and so he wrote me a nice forward for the book, and he's up in Toronto, so so that was kind of nice.
That's cool. So how did the book come together? And tell me a little bit about the background of the book. It's a collection of short stories centered around rivers and paddling.
Yeah, it's a collection of stories I did about canoeing and canoe trips, and I had a few years ago I sort of realized that I had written like a lot of stories about canoeing, and I thought it'd be just fun to collect them into a book that people could take on a canoe trip or have at their cabin or something like that because they're mostly like fun stories, or not all fun, but like good stories. And so I started thinking about that and talking to some people about it. And there was one sort of piece that I felt like was missing, like something about canoeing history. And so that was the one piece that I worked on, and I ended up kind of uh, doing a story about the Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby, which is a race in Minnesota in the 1940s and 50s. It was a 450-mile race. It went from Bemidji to Minneapolis, and I actually interviewed three people who are alive in their 90s who raced in it, and
That's awesome.
found a whole bunch of other information about it in the archives and stuff, and was able to kind of piece together the story of the race and how that all went. And so that takes up a big chunk of the book, about half of it, and then the rest of it is other stories that were published elsewhere, like Outside and Minnesota Conservation Volunteer and the Minneapolis Star Tribune and other places like that. So and there some of them are some of them are first person stories about trips that I took or took with my family, and some of them are third person stories about other people's adventures and everything. And then and then the last section is a bunch of stories about the two Guinness World Record attempts in 2021 and 2023, which I was on the support crew for both those attempts. So
Awesome,
yeah,
man. There's a
so
lot.
yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, a lot to get into. I guess first I was going to ask with the Paul Bunyan story since we started there, but actually even before that, once when you emailed me and I was starting to look up some of your writing, it's just so many awesome topics and different stories that you've written about through your career. Um, but yeah, I had read your piece about swimming and your near death experience. I don't know
Yeah,
where I came across it, but I had read it, and then once I was going through your info, I was like, oh yeah, I recall it. And of course, you know how it is. It was several years ago, and you don't recall all the specifics, but you remember the gist of the story. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
why don't just start there, I guess. Tell me a little bit about the background of that near death experience and kind of how it went down.
Yeah, so that was a story that I did. Well, so I got this solo canoe a couple of years ago. It was during the pandemic, or right? Yeah, it was during the pandemic. Actually, I went up and got it from Sawville Outfitters, and I was so excited to get out on the river. And so, basically, as soon as it opened up, I was out there on Pool One, paddling up the Mississippi, and I didn't really know the canoe very well, and it was and I hadn't I first of all I'd never flipped a canoe in my life, so I didn't even come into my mind as a possibility. But the way those canoes are made for outfitters is that the seat is set back so you can put a pack in the front, and then it's pretty well balanced. But I didn't have any pack in the front, so it was kind of sitting a little bit high. And then I came up to this corner, and um, the wind was really strong coming down around the corner, and so I was trying to turn this way, and I reached out to turn, and just I don't know, the wind caught underneath a little bit or something, gave me a nudge, and all of a sudden I was in the middle of the river in the Mississippi. And this was in late March of
Oof.
2021, and so um, I just knew I needed to get to shore, and I started, and I didn't actually, the cold water, the danger of cold water didn't really occur to me. I mean, I knew sort of abstractly about it, but I didn't apply it, or it didn't really seem like it applied to me. And so I was just like, all right, I know it's cold. I know I got to get to shore. And so I was like pushing my boat and trying to get to shore. And it was just started to get harder and harder. And it wasn't that far. It was probably like 100 feet, but I got about halfway there. And, I just sort of, my arms started to get heavy and I started to kind of sink and the water was coming up over my face, and I just had this kind of realization that I was not gonna make it, and
Wow.
and like literally at that moment, this canoe came out of nowhere, and these two guys threw me a rope and pulled me to shore, and
Holy
so
cow.
it was just a completely random, close call, and I was just so lucky, and so then it was. I think the next year, I obviously like wrote some stuff down, but I wasn't really, when something like that happens, it takes a while before it feels like it's something kind of in the past,
Yeah.
not something that's like still happening to you. And so it took me a while to kind of put it together as like a story. Because I also couldn't really make sense of it because it didn't really, there's these other guys down in Ames, Iowa, who died that same morning. This crew team, from the same winds, they were out and the water was like glass, and it just came up and tipped them, and two of the boys on the
Mm.
Ames University of Iowa canoe team died. Just like literally 2 hours after I almost died, and
Jeez.
so it made it hard to attribute some sort of cosmic, um, meaning to it, and so I just didn't really know how to tell the story in a way. And finally, I just decided I should write it, take my good luck, and try to translate it into like somebody else's good luck, and give people like a warning and make you think twice about cold water. Just like think about cold water as a danger, because most of us kind of don't.
Yeah. 100%. And yeah, it happens so fast. It's like, yeah. And as you mentioned, I can totally see it. Paddling an unloaded boat. That's another one of those things that's like, you know, you don't know anything until, you don't know what you don't know until you find out. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's such a common thing of paddling an unloaded boat where that bow is up out of the water, and it just makes it hard to paddle at any time. But with a little bit of wind, then that wind catches the bow that's out of the water, and yeah, it can be tough. And then just that cold, that first like gasp of cold water. I've had a couple, nothing quite like that, but I've one time I flipped a kayak in where was I? I was in a summer camp trip. And I believe we were in I think it was Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota. Uh and kind of a similar deal. It was wavy. It was in a two-man canoe. I was must have been like 14 or 15 at the time.
yeah.
And uh, we just got caught. It was all fun and games. Everything was fine. And this was in the summer, not, in the spring. And
Mhm, mhm.
we got caught broadside on a big wave and
Yeah,
flipped
yeah.
flipped the kayak like that. And we were fine and got to shore. I don't recall exactly how like the rescue or like how it went down, how we got to shore, but I do remember that there was two of us in that tandem canoe, and the other kid that was with me, I think, was in a little bit worse condition of hypothermic than me, and he was in a
Hmm.
bad way, couldn't think clearly, constantly shivering, and so we wrapped him up in like sleeping bag, and then wrapped him in a tarp and gave him some food and like Snickers and stuff, and it took a while for both of us to get back and kind of come back to, and yeah,
Hmm.
it happens so fast,
Yeah, it does happen so fast. Like one minute you're just living your life, and the next minute the end is like right in front of you. And I got lucky to get around that, but a lot of people don't. There is
Yeah,
a that water up in that area, Voyageurs and the Boundary Waters, they consider it cold water all year round, especially in the big lakes, because you get down a few feet and it's, the water's like 65 degrees or less. Um, and even if the water's like 70 degrees and you're in it long enough, it's going to drag your body temperature down to that same temperature. Eventually that's the thing about the water, the heat goes out of your body so fast compared to the air. And the water I went into was 42 degrees, I think, which is really cold. You got about
really
5
cold.
to 15 minutes before you start to like lose movement, I suppose unless you're like acclimated to it, like some of these cold water people,
Right.
but you can't do that and like at the last minute.
Wow.
So
Hey, question for you, Frank. You wouldn't happen to have a pair of headphones around that have a little microphone, anything like this by chance, would you?
I don't No, I don't. Is it the sound is kind of bad?
It's not. It's fine. It's doable, and I can probably do a little thing in post. But if you had something, it would be a little better. But I can make it work if you don't have anything around.
No, I don't. I don't think. Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries. Um, so what was there was just a random guys that were also out, and they happened to have a throw rope with them, and
Yep.
who were they, and what was their story? And have you stayed connected with them at all, or did you?
Well, for a long time, I didn't know who they were because like they just pulled me ashore and then they went and got my canoe and then I went and got my canoe and we went our separate ways and I knew their first names, but like for a year, I didn't have any idea who they were. And then when my story came out, they wrote to me like right away. It's like four people sent them the story because they had thought about that a lot too, and um, it was not anything special that they were going to be there on the river. They had planned to go on Friday, and something came up, and then they had planned to go on Saturday, and something came up, and then or no, they were going to go in the afternoon, but then they had to work or something, and so like I don't know, it was just completely last minute that they probably put in on the water about the same time I did, and then we like met in the middle. Um, and so I did meet them, and their names were Hunter Smoak and Jake Abrams, and and I actually dedicated the book to them because um,
It's awesome.
it wouldn't be written without them. So yeah, they're super nice guys, and really humble, and they said they spent like the whole year thinking about it too, like every day.
Crazy. Well, glad we're here chatting about it.
Yeah, and there was a second piece I published about meeting them and going canoeing with or and talking about getting kind of their perspective of how it went down, and so I combined those two pieces in the book into one piece. So
Hmm, awesome. So, how did you come across, and how did you start diving in? You mentioned the Paul Bunyan race in the what was it in the 40s or 50s?
hmm
Uh,
yeah,
how,
that race.
how did you come
That
across that, and why did it draw your interest?
well, everybody in Minnesota, people kind of know about that race, and it's pretty well known, but nobody could tell me much about it. Like even
I've never heard of it.
yeah, the even the sons of the people who were in it are still around, and they knew like a little bit about it. The grandkids of a lot of the people who competed in it are around, but they don't know much of anything about it. But it's still mentioned as kind of this big event. And a lot of the people who were in it racing, like Gene Jensen, Carl Ketter, Buzzy Peterson, were like some of the best canoeists in the in North America. And Gene Jensen went on to become a really famous canoe builder and racer, and really influential. And so I thought it'd be a good way to tie in kind of Minnesota's canoeing history and racing history into a way that kind of links it to today. And um, I was kind of poking around for stuff about that when I heard about this guy, Bill Smith, who had been in the race in 1947 and 1949, and he was like 92 and still remembered everything, and remembered like so much stuff that nobody ever knew about and wasn't in the papers or anything like that. And so I went out and interviewed him and got some really awesome stories from him, and you know, and also some missing piece of canoeing history, because he there was a period in there where everybody was trying to figure out what the fastest canoe was, and they all basically built their canoes. And a lot of the racers in that race were Ojibwe from Leech Lake, um, and who had been building canoes forever and ever. And in the so Bill Smith raced in 1947 with his dad. 1948, he sat
And
out
it was a 450-mile race, is that right?
yeah, they would do it in stages. They would paddle like 40 to 80 miles a day, and then stop and eat dinner, and then get up the next day, and then they'd start again. Um, and so and then it was in the paper every day too, and so people were reading about it and excited about it. And then by the time they got to Minneapolis, there'd be like 100,000 people watching the final sprint down on the river
Wow.
in
How
Minneapolis.
awesome would that be today?
Yeah, I know, it's cool. And
And, not to derail you again, but it was on the, Mississippi, or
yeah, in the
what water?
Mississippi, it started in
Okay,
Bemidji, and then came down. It does kind of a S curve down to Minneapolis.
okay,
Um, yeah, yeah, and so Bill Smith, he uh, the next year, 1948, he crewed for Gene Jensen and Tom Estes, who were his neighbors basically, um, and and he while he was crewing, he was watching all the canoes go by, and he could see these one guys, Jim and Bernie Smith, were these native guys from Ball Club, and their canoe. He said it like danced on the water, the way they paddled it, and so after the race, he had him come over to his house, and he bought the canoe from them, and then he used it in 1949 to race, and he and his partner ended up finishing like fourth, um, and Gene Jensen won, but he could see that canoe was like better than his canoe, and so he went and borrowed it after that, and won. He won the race at um, what's it called? The one up in Canada, La Classique,
okay.
with that canoe and some other stuff, and then he came back next year with a canoe that was based more on that canoe than the one that had been using in 1948, and so it was kind of part of that evolution of the racing canoe.
Hmm, fascinating. Also, I've found, this is just anecdotal, but it seems like, we were talking about canoe culture. It seems like Minnesota in particular, is like the niche of fast canoes and canoe racing, and the Winona canoes, which are built for
Mm-hmm.
speed and racing, whereas in Maine you got your old towns and your more like logging and tripping style canoes. I think maybe Wisconsin is more in that realm, but yeah, it's interesting how that all plays into it, because it seems like yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this Jensen character, who you've mentioned. I don't know really anything about him other than that he's a famous canoe designer who's built,
Yeah.
all kinds of different canoe designs for Winona and others, I think, and all derived on speed, right?
Well, the Winona canoes that you're talking about were designed by Gene Jensen. They say Jensen on the side of them, and so he and Mike Chickanowski knew each other, and so he would license them through Winona Canoe. So, so yeah, that's a direct link to that, Paul Bunyan Canoe Derby.
Hmm. Fascinating. And I got to imagine the Smith guy who you talked to, he was probably as happy as could be to share some of his stories, and that someone else was taking interest in it, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. He was really happy because Jim and Bernie Smith never sort of got credit for their canoe design, and the other thing that he wanted people to know is there's another guy, a Ojibwe guy who's a racer and coach for the race named uh, Jesse Tibbetts, who um, he the, there's a big lake up here called Lake Winnebagoshish, or Big Winnie they call it, and it's a really dangerous lake. A lot of people flip, and it's 16 miles across, um, and the waves get super big because it's shallow. And every year in the Derby, people would tip, and they tried to have boats out there to help them. And he and his partner, like, it was pretty wavy, and they kept getting water in the boat, and they didn't have anything to bail it with, and so they just eventually swamped and were sitting in the middle of the lake. And this guy Jesse Tibbetts found them and came over and dumped their boat out and sent them on their way. And that was not in any of the newspapers or anything. And so,
Hmm.
and then the other thing, Jim and Bernie Smith in that race, in the 1949 race, they started from Lake Bemidji, and he, just as he was starting out, he broke both his paddle and then the extra paddle too, and so he was just sitting there with like no paddle. And Jim and Bernie Smith came up and threw him a paddle, and they were like, "Here, use this." And so he used their paddle for the rest of the race.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, Lake Winnie, that's a big one for the Mississippi through paddlers now. When I paddled the river in 2017, and that's like the first kind of large obstacle, not the first, but one of the first ones that's is notorious because it's so big and round, and it's, as you mentioned, it's a lake on the Mississippi. Mississippi kind of comes to a bit of a standstill, and turns into this lake for 16
Mhm.
miles. And your intuition, or I guess the want is, just to cut right across it to take the shortest route. But of course, if you get out stuck in the middle of 16 miles, and you're in the dead middle of the lake as the winds come up, man, they get gnarly. So most people take either, the east or west shore. And I remember when I was doing it, I was paddling and had to pull off at one of the resorts there. Because
Mhm.
midday the wind just got so crazy, and we had to pull off, and I was with a couple other paddlers at the time, and wait out wait out the wind a little bit before we could continue on. So yeah, that still holds true today.
Yeah, there was one of the races. I think it was in, I can't remember which year, maybe 50, 1950. The waves were like 5 or 6 feet on Winnie, you know. And there's some years where it was too rough, and they just had to truck around it, you know, or
Hmm.
get portaged around it. So, um, yeah, it's dangerous, and it can be glass when you start. They would start really early in the morning, but then as soon as that wind comes up, it's something about the lake being so shallow that makes the waves really really big. And all those lakes up there, or a lot of those big lakes on the Mississippi, are artificial reservoirs, and they were. My understanding is they were originally made for the mills in Minneapolis, so they could control the water flow, and if we wouldn't like run out of water for the milling down here in the city.
Hmm. Yeah, that was my experience too. We started out in the morning; it was completely glass, and then it takes a long time to paddle across that thing. So by the time midday hits, or even before that, it was pretty brutal. Um, So going from the late 1940s Paul Bunyan canoe race. Now you were a part of the crew for the Guinness World Record attempt for speed paddling, fastest known canoeing paddle of the mighty Mississippi, all 2,000, what is it, 2,300 some odd miles.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Hmm.
need to get some of that crew on, and Scott, and I need to get him on the podcast and chat with him about it. But how did that come to be? How did you join it? And how did you find that experience? Because it was 2 attempts, right?
Yeah, it was 2 attempts. Yeah, so I started following it when KJ Milhone, he and his um, friend Steve Eckelkamp had the record in 1980 when it was like 35 days.
Okay, so
And then
35 days was the previous, or in the 80s was the record to paddle the
yeah,
whole trip, which just for reference, no, I wasn't going for speed. In some aspects, I was doing the opposite, but I did it in 103 days.
right. Yeah, and so through the 80s it got, and up until 2003, I think, it got lowered to 18 days and change. And and KJ's partner Steve Eckelkamp died, and he went to speak at his funeral, and one of his nephews, I think, was interested in trying to get the record again, and so they made an attempt in 2018, and that was in the news, and they didn't. They got down to like Iowa or something, and were too far behind, and kind of fell apart. But I got in touch with KJ, and he was thinking about making another, like a real attempt, um, and he had a plan. There's an idea that can be run in as little as 15 days if everything goes well. And you have on the water support and all that stuff, and a lot of things have to go right. But that's kind of the probably as fast as you could possibly do it ever. And so he was kind of working off that plan, um, and they were gonna go. He recruited, Scott Miller, another guy from I think Bayfield, and then his daughter Casey were gonna do it in 2020. But then when the pandemic hit, they had a big argument about whether they should go or not, and it was pretty bitter. And they split up, and Scott took most of the crew, KJ took most of the equipment, and they each sort of started on their own attempts for 2021. And by the time, so I was still planning to do a story about it. It was kind of on ice during the pandemic. But then once these guys both started gearing up for 2021, the story was back on, and so it started to come near time to launch, and KJ was still short of people, and so he offered me a spot on the support boat as a way of like getting the story and also getting himself a crew member. Um, and so I was not all that excited about it. It was literally like a month and a half after I had my near death experience, and so I was still a little shell shocked from that. But I wasn't really doing anything else that year. It was still kind of pandemic-y, and I was kind of itching to do something, and so I signed up, and I spent the next, it was like 14 days. I met up with them. I didn't do any crewing up in northern Minnesota, but then when they hit the cities, I joined up, and then we went all the way down to mile marker zero.
Wow.
And Scott was just behind us on that trip, like 2 weeks, and so we were competing against the 2003 um, time, and always like comparing where we were and stuff, and Scott was competing against our time, and so it was pretty exciting. It was a great.
Good
It
old,
was
good old
made.
fashioned battle royale.
Yeah, I know. It was good material for a story. So.
I bet.
So then, I don't know. You probably know the ending. I mean, Scott, like, they had a big, huge waves outside of New Orleans and swamped like 135 miles from the end. And then we did beat the record by, I think it was like, I can't remember now, 5 or 9 hours. And but it was very possible that Scott was going to beat our record, so it would only last like 2 weeks. Um, so then, but about 2 weeks after that, after Scott tanked, he decided he was going to go again, and then started putting together his 2023 attempt. And so I signed up for crewing for that, and I was on the support crew from Itasca to well, basically to Wabasha. Um, but yeah, it was fun. It was fun. It was a good crew.
And what did like what was a rough schedule, or like how did it play out, and then how did the support crew play out? Like, I mean, obviously if you're going for the fastest record and it's, that amount of time, they're paddling through the night, they're busting out all the stops, like, you know
Yeah,
bathroom on
yeah.
the
It
boat, like.
was the 2021 attempt was really rough. We were had barely enough people, and the two guys for the night crew, me and another guy for the day crew, and then KJ's wife Lisa would pitch in, and
And
some other
so it
people.
was were they both four-man boats, or how was that paddling
Yeah,
crew?
yeah, they're both the same Minnesota 4
Yep.
modified, with a bunch of stuff. So yeah, they were all Minnesota 4 canoes with 4 canoes,
Okay. And
and
so
and
you
then
had
we'd have a support boat on the water theoretically, um, accompanying them.
and so what was the, I mean, just making that trip in a vessel, in a motorboat, is a feat of its own. So what kind of boat were you guys on, and how did the support crew play into both of these attempts?
Yeah, I mean, it's really stressful. We were on a pontoon, and the pontoon that we had, we didn't realize it was like had leaks in it, and
Oh
it
boy.
was overloaded, and so it got pulled out twice, once in Lake City, and then once in Savannah, and then it was done because it kept getting water in the tanks, and it could barely even keep up with the canoe.
Right.
And we were at night one time, we were on that, and we ran straight over a buoy and lost our depth finder. And
Oh my gosh.
there's there's a lot of close calls, and the canoe itself had like a lot of close calls. Like they went like into a whirlpool and kind of punched through the other side of it, and then popped up and almost flipped. That's in the middle of the night. They went over, way down south, near the end. There are these things called passes. Do you know those, where the water
Yes.
flows out the side and it goes down? Um, they went accidentally over that pass, twice, and had to paddle back up this like foot drop, into
Oh my
back into the
gosh.
main channel in the middle of the night. Um,
That is
yeah,
gnarly.
and ran up on rocks one time and had to go backwards, and people die every year on those things going over the edge.
Right.
Uh, and there was one time where they came within, depending who you ask, 3 or 10 feet of getting hit by a barge.
Oh my god. That is way too close for comfort.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, that's the other thing that I didn't even necessarily think about, or contend with, is that especially the paddling at night, that's just such a different element, and when you're delirious and, like, you know,
hmm
redlining it and just, like, pedal to the metal, like, mistakes can happen.
Well, the canoe itself is going sometimes like 7, 8, 9, even 11 miles an hour. And if you hit something going that speed, you're not necessarily going to stay upright.
Right.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, yeah. No, that paddling at night is really dangerous. I don't advise it. Even being on the support crew boat at night is dangerous. Yeah.
Seriously, 100%, yeah. Boating at night. Uh,
No, I know.
maybe even the support boat might be more dangerous, but
Yeah,
just
agreed.
because yeah, you the speed and such. But yeah, that's crazy. So how did the two attempts differ from your perspective of being on the support crew? Because I didn't necessarily know the background of the two attempts and that they were kind of tied together at one point. I kind of thought they were independent, which they
Yeah.
were, but
Well, the second attempt, the 2023 attempt, was run by Moose Dougherty, who ran the first attempt, and so they had two support boats. They had a ton of people, and Moose is super uh, good at organizing that kind of thing and motivating people and stuff. And also, he had already done one of these things, and so he you learn like so much the first time
so I
about.
guess even before we get there, you weren't on the crew, but what you briefly mentioned it, but what happened at the end of the 2021 race for the second boat that was pacing ahead of you guys, but a couple weeks behind
Yeah,
you? They swamped near the end.
yeah. What happened was it was at night. It was like mile 135 or something outside of New Orleans, and they were getting a lot of really big winds, and there were it was the middle of the night, if I'm remembering right, and there were like boats everywhere, and the waves were super high. They were like 5 feet even, and they just didn't know what to do. There was no shore to go to because that area is really built up, and so they couldn't just pull off, and so they went to hold on to the support boat, um, and as they were holding on, they just kept getting more and more water in, and they couldn't bail fast enough, and so finally they just had to like throw everything on the boat that they could and abandon it, and it just like disappeared into the river.
Oh my gosh! So it was
Yeah.
old Minnesota Four was swallowed up by the mighty Mississippi, huh?
Yep, yep. They did eventually get it back. It was wrapped around a pole under a deck somewhere, and somebody shipped it all the way back up here, and it was in Scott's backyard. I went over and saw it. It folded up like a taco. It was not salvageable.
That's
But yeah,
wild.
I mean they were like like I said, 135 miles from the end, and yeah, yeah, it was
And
rough. It
so
was rough.
and
But
so
everybody lived, and so that's the good part.
I say so. And so the second attempt, uh, uh, it was a little more organized, a little more, uh, I would say
It was
publicized,
more
just from me knowing about it.
It was more like polished. They knew
Right.
what they were doing. They knew what needed to happen. It was streamlined. It was stripped down. And there was like shifts. There was plenty of people for support crew and stuff, and so it was just a really smooth operation as far as that went.
Cool.
So yeah, which
Um,
is that's part of the whole thing. You have to have a good support crew and support team to be able to make this record. You can't. It's not like in 1980 where you can just do it with a buddy in a car who makes you peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and hopefully you meet him, and hopefully or something like that.
yeah, not until the next generation of fast canoes are developed, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the limit is, but we'll see. Yeah.
Um, Fascinating stuff. You've written all kinds of other stories. What are there any other ones particularly from your book that I don't know. I don't want to say that are interesting because obviously they're all interesting. But like, is there what's the next one that you connect with the most?
Um, I like. There's one story. Well, my favorite story I think is about our. We did a family trip down the Mississippi and from Minneapolis to Winona in 2017 also. So depending on what
Nice.
time of year you were out there, we may have crossed paths. What when was your trip?
I started at the end of August up at the headwaters.
Oh, okay, yeah, we were in June,
Okay.
but we did get passed by one of the. I later, like 5 years later, I talked to Tim Muhich who Muhich who made a two two attempts, and I'm like 100% sure they passed us right around Prescott because this racing canoe went by super fast, and I asked him where he was, and he said they were right about there,
That's funny.
in on the same day. And so, but yeah, we went down. It was just a really fun trip with my wife and two daughters, going from Minneapolis to Winona. It's only like 125 miles, and we went like 25 miles a day and camped on islands and stuff, and
It's such a
uh,
beautiful
it
stretch.
was, it was just a great trip. Yeah. There's another story that I had in there about that I that is I like about these people who got caught in the Pagami Creek fire in the Boundary Waters, um, and they were, just kayak camping up there, and the fire just went crazy out of control, and was traveling like, I don't know, 14 miles an hour or something, and just overtook their camp, and they went out. They somehow got out in the middle of the lake, and the whole lake was on fire around them.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
they just thought they were going to die too, and then sort of at the last minute, it created its own weather system, and a bunch of rain came down and put the fire out essentially.
Phew.
So that was another story. There's a really cool story that I did, about this place in the Quetico called Sturgeon Narrows that everybody who's been to feels like is a very weird place. And
Hmm.
I talked to this guy who had a really, really weird experience there when he was a camper when he was like 12, and he and another guy were in a tent and had all this weird stuff happen outside the tent. And I found the other guy and talked to him, and he told me the same story. And they hadn't talked basically since then.
Wow.
Um, so that's kind of a fun story.
Huh. Kind of just spooky stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like this. It sounded like you said. It sounded like a tree falling down, but then there was more and more and more until it was just like this roar, um, outside their tent, and then they heard like voices coming across the water and stuff, and I don't know. It was just weird. Bunch
Oof.
of weird stuff.
Uh,
Um,
Tell me a
yeah.
little bit about as I was looking through some of the work that you've done. Another story that piqued my interest is, and it's the name that I've heard, but I couldn't tell you about it. The guy who did the 9,000 mile trip from
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
where where all the way up to Nome, Alaska. What is it? It's Jerry?
Jerry Pushkar.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I thought I thought about putting that story in on my like kind of review of his book and interview with him, but ended up kind of not fitting. But yeah, he wrote a really great book called it's called like Waters Beneath My Feet. It's about his journey. He went from New Orleans, paddled up the Mississippi, then up the St. Croix, and then portaged over to Lake Superior. Went around the Lake Superior up to Grand Portage, went over the Grand Portage, wintered up there in northern Minnesota somewhere, then went on to west, out to
And what?
Canada,
When was this? What time frame we talking?
like I think late 70s,
Okay.
in the 70s, I think late 70s. Then he went through another winter. He had to like build a house basically out in the woods, and um, lost at least one dog to wolves, and ended up paddling all the way to Nome. Or, well, he can't paddle all the way to Nome, but he paddled as far as he could, and then he walked the last 250 miles to Nome, and that's where he lives today. It's like 9,000 miles.
Insane. It had to be quite the
Yeah,
journey.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, I know. I was just looking through here if there's any other stories.
Yeah.
Oh, I did another story. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I picked through a few. Uh a lot of them still that I haven't asked you about that I find interesting. I'm gonna have to go through and read them all after I picked your brain. But I guess what Grand Portage. You always hear it, and I kind of know of it about it. It's like an old Voyager or just an old native or whatever route, classic route that traverses waterways. But what can you tell me about Grand Portage? That's about the
Well,
gist of what I know.
I don't know. I usually pronounce it Grand Portage. I know Canadians say Portage. But in
Honestly,
Illinois, they say
I always say Portage, always.
yeah,
But for some reason, when I say Grand Portage, I feel like I've just heard Grand Portage so many times that
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's like a name that
yeah.
just
No,
rolls off the tongue.
we usually say Grand Portage in Minnesota, but it's basically a so Grand Portage National Monument was a trading post right on the Lake Superior, and then the Grand Portage is a 9 mile portage up over the Sawtooth Mountains. It's like the lowest. It's the easiest route to get over those mountains because you can't. The Pigeon River comes down, but there's these huge waterfalls that you can't get over or around, and so you got to take the Grand Portage to get up to the Pigeon River. And then once you get up to the Pigeon River, you can go all the way to, you know, all the way into the interior, way into Canada.
Okay.
So,
So
so
like basically it connects what like the
Lake Superior
Midwest.
with the rest of North America.
Okay.
Um, and and so the Voyagers would take that. Native Americans took it for like I think they say like 2,000 years. People have been taking that portage, um, and they used to. The Voyagers would carry like 40 pound, like 2 40 pound packs of beaver pelt, up over that thing. Um, and so we did that trip as a family, and it's a great hike. You can get a backcountry permit to camp up at the river there at what used to be Fort Charlotte, um, and then just come back down, or you can just hike it also. So,
Awesome. I'm always fascinated by those old fur trading routes and the old fur trading posts and just like the classic routes because it's so funny how whatever whether it's animals like you think of I think of beavers because I'm actually a beaver trapper, so I like trapping, and so they
mhm.
always take the same path, right? Like the path of least resistance, and it's the same
Yeah, yeah.
thing for like these portages and like all of these like historical routes. It's like it's so interesting and fascinating to me that like everybody came to the same conclusion forever that this is the best route, and it was, and it is, and just
Hmm.
all of these like rivers and waterways that linked the world together, that almost are like, for so long were the highways of our world, but now they're almost like uh, forgotten
Yeah,
paths after
a
like the
lot of them
internet.
are forgotten and grown over and stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I was kind of looking into that, trying to figure out where all the big portages were in Minnesota, because there are a lot of them. There's some, one of them, the Savannah Portage, is a state park, and you can go hike on it. And that connected, I think, the Lake Superior watershed with the Mississippi
Okay.
watershed. I think, but
And I think
there's other ones.
there's one in Wisconsin, I believe. I think they also call it Grand Portage or something else, but I forget which it connects, but it's the Mississippi to I
Does
don't
that go
know.
from the St. Croix or like the Namaquagan to the Brule?
I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that connects the Mississippi with the Lake Superior.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the portage that Jerry Pushkar took, I think, when he went
Okay.
that way.
Huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Fascinating
No,
stuff.
it's cool. Yeah, no, the Grand Portage is great, and we saw like moose tracks and wolf footprints and everything when we went on that trail.
Hmm.
We didn't really see very many people. We saw one group of Boy Scouts or boys from a boys' camp coming down the Grand Portage with their canoe. We didn't have a canoe, but we just hiked it. So it's a long
Sounds
way to
easy.
go with the canoe. Yeah,
I know, man. It's like I, as a kid and, canoe camping in Wisconsin and going to canoe camp, portaging was always like a rite of passage. And like, you were hardy if you could portage and, you
Right,
enjoyed it
right,
and all this stuff. And the older I've gotten, the more I've, you know, done mostly just river trips now. I prefer rivers and don't do as many lakes. And, like the Mississippi, once you get to Minneapolis, you don't have to do any portages. And so
right, right.
my portage days are in the rear view. But funny enough, because of that, my packing style has changed, right? Because if you don't have to portage, you bring the cooler, you bring the kitchen sink, you bring it all.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I forgot about like why canoeists, have those Duluth packs or whatever brand you want to call them now, and like consolidate everything because these days my stuff is all over the place. But I did a Boundary
Mhm.
Waters trip with my buddies. I think it would have been 2019 or something. It was before the pandemic. And we went up there, and I was kind of like, I took one of my buddies who isn't very outdoorsy out there, and it was my first time in the Boundary Waters. And as you know, I'm sure, Boundary Waters are just full of portages.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I still had like my river tripping mentality the first time I went up there. And I was doing like five trip portages, and it was just brutal. And I kind of
yeah,
got reminded about how to pack for when you're portaging.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that's a nice thing about the boundary waters. Though most, I mean, apart from the portages, you can bring a lot of stuff still
Yes, yes.
compared to like backpacking or something.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yeah. You only have to backpack for the few hundred feet that you portage.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
a couple other, thoughts and questions. I've always been fascinated by, like we've been talking a little bit about, but like the cold water swimmers and the people who do like ice swimming and stuff. I was
yeah.
cruising through your pages and I saw one, I'm guessing it was from a while ago, about the Ice Queen. Do you recall this
Yeah,
article? And when kind of give me a little bit of a background about that. You interviewed a gal who does this cold water, open water swimming.
yeah. Her name's Sveta Vold. I think, I think she's from Belarus, and is kind of sports, extreme sports person, and she started this cold water um, swimming group that every day in the winter they cut a hole in the ice and then they go in every day and spend as much time in there as they can stand. She can, and you can get used to that cold water. Like she can be in there for like 45 minutes before she starts to
Insane.
get cold, and so you can kind of acclimate yourself to cold water. But I don't know. Supposedly it has a lot of like health benefits and immune benefits, and which I don't. I think is actually true, but I sort of lost my taste for cold water, so I'm not doing that.
Understandable. Yeah. And she's doing it with like just in like a classic swimsuit, right? It's not like she's
It's
going
a,
out there in
yeah,
like
no, it's a bunch of, and
wetsuits.
they have a huge group that does it. Like basically all the lakes in Minneapolis have that now. They all have
Really?
a full cut where people go and do a cold water plunge like every day.
That's cool.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's become a big thing.
Huh. Now pair it with a sauna and I'm game.
They do. Well, right at our lake here at Lake Nokomis, there is a sauna in the parking lot. It's not cheap, but it's you can go in the sauna. You can pay for an hour and go in the sauna and go back and forth and stuff. And so yeah, you can
That's
do that too.
legit. That is right up my alley. Minnesota's calling me.
Yeah, come on up.
And then uh the last thing I got as far as story wise is I'm an angler, man. I love to fish. If I'm not paddling or canoeing, I'm fishing. And usually when I'm paddling and canoeing, I'm fishing. And I saw one of your titles, Rough Fish Revolution. Uh,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love
yeah,
it. I love it. Talk to me a little bit about that. I know I'm a little bit dialed into that scene because it's a passion of mine, but uh, what is a
Yeah.
rough fish, and what was kind of the background or gist of that story?
Well, so for 100 years or more, there've been these kind of two categories of fish: game fish and rough fish, or commercial fish and rough fish. And rough fish are considered like garbage fish that are not worth anything. And they're usually fish that are like harder to clean, or they have a lot of
Carp,
bones or something like that.
suckers, gar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that people, there's just basically people that fish that people don't want to catch. But like, um, and so the game fish have been protected and managed and researched and all this stuff
In game
for a
fish,
long
we're
time.
talking smallmouth, largemouth,
Yeah,
walleye, all your classic go-tos.
right. That people like want to catch and have limits and stuff, and so up until recently, there have been the rough fish are not managed at all. Like you catch as many, and actually people thought that you should like catch them and throw them on the shore, or kill them because it's better for the game fish, and the rough fish are just you know taking space and food from the game fish. And so, but recently they've been more and more people have been realizing that these are important native fish, and we don't know hardly anything about them because they've never been researched. And just last year, they are now going to be protected in Minnesota. I would be pretty surprised if other states didn't follow suit, but um, yeah, there you won't be able to. Um, it's been sort of compounded by the rise of bow fishing and bow fishing tournaments, where people they'll go out and shoot like 20,000 pounds of fish and just throw them in dumpsters afterwards. And these are like some are carp, but like most of them are native fish like buffalo, quillback, red horse, all these fish that are amazing. And they're learning so much about them now. There's a guy up in Duluth who researches buffalo and um, found some just incredible things. Like they live to be like over 100 years old. They found
Oh my
one that
god.
was like 127 years old,
Holy
um,
cow.
and those old fish have no signs of aging, so we don't even know if they have a natural death point or if they're just incidentally killed. Um, and so we're just learning so much about these fish that have been just considered trash for so long. And even the other fish like bowfin are live to be I think 30 years old, and quillback live to be like 44 years old. And
And
yeah,
yeah,
it's
they're awesome fish, and it seems like Minnesota has been kind of spearheading. They had the rough fish bill, has been spearheading this
yeah,
kind of like the title of the article, which I think is great, rough fish revolution, where they're trying to bring awareness to, like you said, a lot of these fish that are native, and just kind of bypassed or like the redheaded stepchild of most anglers, but in reality they're amazing. I mean, I love fishing for gar, which gar are crazy. Like if you told somebody that there could be a 5 foot fish or whatever, 3 foot spotted gar or long nosed gar or whatever swimming around with massive teeth and you can catch it, it's like, what? Yeah, sign me up. Like, that's awesome.
yeah, gar are amazing. They can breathe air, and they basically have almost not changed since before the dinosaurs. They're like a prehistoric fish, literally.
It's amazing. Yeah, buffalo are awesome. Red horse, like you said. What else are some of my favorites? Bowfin, man, bowfin are there. Caught some bowfin on the Mississippi in Minnesota, near. Let's see, where have I caught some? Near La Crosse area, and yeah, man, bowfin are awesome. Like huge teeth, great fight, and
Mhm.
yeah, people just think they're trash. I don't get it.
Yeah, we used to catch them on Lake Winona when I was growing up, and they were really fun to catch. Um, They fight like hell. We call them dogfish,
Right.
um, for some reason, but yeah, no, they're obviously getting more respect, and some fish like the eel pout, used to be considered a rough fish, but now so many people want to catch it, it's been moved into the game category, or it was moved into the game category before the rough fish bill, but um, now they should all have some kind of limits or some kind of protection.
And so the rough fish bill passed in Minnesota, and now there's limits on rough fish the same way that there would be on game fish.
Yeah, I don't know what the exact status of it is. The DNR has to establish restitution values for each fish. Like, for example, like if you every fish has a restitution value. So if you catch like that many fish over your limit, you have to pay a fine, like $30 per walleye or something like that. And so once they get those established, they'll be for some reason that's like a trigger for the limits. And so I think
Okay.
they're working on that, and that should happen somewhat soon.
Hmm. Awesome.
So so yeah, but you won't be able to kill 10,000 uh, or 500 both 500 rough fish in a bow fishing tournament. You have to pay like $20,000.
Uh, it's funny though. There's always gray area, right? Because I'm sure that they're still trying to clear out the Asian carp that are there, or the
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. But a lot of people don't distinguish or don't even know how to distinguish between a buffalo and a carp because they
oh yeah,
look kind of
100%.
similar.
Yeah,
So it's problematic. I mean, the carp are the only fish that will not have a limit are carp.
right.
So you'll still be able to shoot those, but you just have to know what you're doing and not not just like shoot any fish.
Indiscriminately, yeah.
It's like if you're deer hunting, you gotta know you're shooting a deer, not a dog or something.
Right.
You know,
Uh,
so
yeah,
you just have to educate yourself.
yeah. Awesome, Frank. Well, man, I've enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything that we didn't touch on?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I just hope people. I just wanted to, as far as this book goes, I just wanted to create something fun. Like a fun book that people could take on a trip or have at their cabin or something, and that would kind of inspire people to get out there and connect them with the river and with the past, and just sort of make it mean a little more.
That's great, man. Yeah, the book is called Pushing the River, an Epic Battle, a Lost History, a Near Death, and Other True Canoeing Stories by Frank Burris. And it's pre order available right now. We're recording this conversation on March 5th. It'll be published a little bit later than that. Publishing date for the book is April 8th. Is that still the date?
Yep, that's still the date. I'll be doing some readings. I'll be doing a reading down in Decorah, Iowa, La Crosse, Duluth, Minneapolis, obviously, a bunch of places like that. I'll be at the Wisconsin Canoe Museum in July, giving a talk, and hopefully some other places too. I'll try to put a list on my website of readings and stuff, but it should be around in a bunch of different places. So
Great. Love
so
it. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm looking forward to diving into it. And
Yeah,
of course,
you can anybody can pre-order it, and I'll send you some links for that.
great.
But yeah, you should get it early March or early April.
Awesome. Yeah. And of course, the beautiful thing about podcasts is this thing's staying up forever. So, I still have people listening to episodes from 4 years ago. So, yeah, check out the book. Hopefully it'll continue to be heard and people will dive into it. Is there a best place to get it, or a preferred place to get it, or even just where can we learn more about your writings and the articles and such? Because we talked about a lot about your writings that aren't in the book as well.
Yeah, 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 yeah. You can check out my website, which is just frankburris.com. It's published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press, and you can order it directly through them. There's also a website called you can order from whatever your local bookseller is, or there's a place called bookshop.org, which you can order it through there, and they give a little money to local bookshops too. And then you can obviously order it from the big places as well. That's you so you can basically you should be able to order anywhere, but the Historical Society Press or bookshop.org are probably the best places, or your local bookshop.
Awesome, man. I love it. Well, yeah, thanks for the conversation. I'm looking forward to diving into the book, and yeah, hopefully goes well for you. And keep in touch.
All right, yeah, thanks for having me. Well, good, nice talking to you.
You bet. You too. All righty.